God who ate supper with his friends before suffering death on the cross to show us the way of love forever. Amen.
Amen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I began reading a new book last week about emotions and connection and what to do with all this stuff cluttering up my tiny little head and heart. It's called Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown. In the book, she walks through why emotional intelligence and introspection are such important skills to have in relationships. When I read that, I thought, yes, this is my jam! And then she went into why it's so incredibly challenging for us as humans to cultivate meaningful relationships when we are going through hard things. Because most of us, me included, are limited linguistically to a small handful of emotions. Anger, joy, sadness, maybe frustration or depression or anxious. But most people, she said, are limited in their capacity to nuance what they are feeling deeper than that. She used the illustration of sitting in your doctor's office after a really painful injury, but your mouth was covered with tape, and you couldn't explain to your physician what was ailing you because you had this barrier to your communication. She then introduced the concept that there are really more like 87 emotions and experiences that make us human. That immediately led me to think about this week and what we are heading into. As a global church unified in the suffering, death, and resurrection of a God who put on flesh to show us love, which is not an emotion from what I can gather about God. And as we were putting together the liturgies for today and the Triduum later this week, it felt as though it was the first time I had walked through this week in a very long time, at least liturgically, in community, which is true. In 2020, we had only just begun to plan out what Holy Week would look like when the pandemic was inching its way closer to our doors, and the diocese issued the pastoral directive we are still under 2 years later. The emotions that flooded all our hearts as we held the vulnerabilities we each acknowledged, willingly or not, and the ways in which we were forced to consider how important or not this place was to our understanding of God's love for us. I heard story after story as things began to open back up about the fear, anger, hope, sadness, grief, joy, and anticipation you felt, I felt, as we slowly began to imagine regathering. And then I thought about what it is that we are actually walking through this week, through the eyes of some of you who've never walked through it with us. Sorry, missed a page. As we were slowly beginning to reimagine regathering, the questions that the vestry has had to navigate with us over the past 2 years alone deserves a Nobel Peace Prize for envisioning a better world for those of us gathered in this place. But the liturgies for Holy Week have been dispersed and unfamiliar for the last 2 years due to the unknown and unableism that dominated our collective imaginations. 2020 was a spreadsheet of places you could click on to watch, if parishes had the means to provide a digital presence and the capacity to pivot that quickly, which many did not. 2021 was still so unknown until too late that some clergy from the northern region decided to orchestrate an impressively large project of collaboration with readings and music and prayers and pieces of Holy Week into one beautiful piece of art that I hope we don't ever have to do again. But this year we're back. The bulletin is printed, the music laid out, the readers are being gathered, the sermons are being written. It's going to be amazing. And then I thought about what it is that we're actually walking through this week through the eyes of some of you who've never been through it with us. And it gave me pause because it's not actually amazing at all. It's one of the most challenging weeks to stay present with in all of the seasons of the year. It holds up and commemorates the epic drama of God's love for humanity. Vulnerability, betrayal, joy, grief, hope, anger, disappointment, abandonment, and about 80 or more emotions and experiences smushed into 3 days. A better word for the Holy Week liturgies is probably something more like intense, rather than amazing. Amazing is a sandwich from L'Chaim, or the East Shore Deli. Intense is the love that God has for his creation. And you, his beloved, are invited into that offering Thursday, Friday, and Saturday this week. It's not that one can't celebrate Easter next Sunday without journeying the way of the cross with Jesus this week. But why would you? To know the love and suffering Jesus went through to defeat death once and for all is more than a fairy tale story. It's what shapes our worldview, that God would pour out himself in a very public and humiliating and dehumanizing way in order to show us a better way to be in relationship with God and one another and all of creation. For over 2,000 years, theologians have been wrestling over what it means that God died on a cross for humanity. We call it soteriology, and there are no less than 7 theories of what specifically was happening on the cross. None of us knows fully what God was doing. None of us can know fully. But we are invited to experience it through these liturgies of Palm Sunday and Passion, Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, and the Great Vigil of Easter. If you can suspend your plans for just a few days and accompany Christians throughout the world, Christ promises to be with us. And it's preferred to be experienced in person. But if you can't be here in person for whatever reason, know that we will be live streaming it for you to participate from wherever you are. You are invited, God's beloved, and I hope you accept the invitation. Amen.